Good evening et bonsoir. Welcome to this evening's lecture, the first one we've hosted online this season. My name is Catherine Spencer-Ross, and I'm president of Heritage Ottawa and chair of its lecture series committee. Some of you were able to join our end of September walking tour where we explored some landscapes of pioneering Canadian landscape architect Cornelia Overlander. One of these was the grounds around the National Gallery of Canada, the result of a mid-1980s collaboration with the gallery's architect, Moshe Safdie, the subject of this evening's lecture. Before we learn more about this great architect, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa is at the heart of a vast homeland whose history reaches back long before the development of the National Capital Region as we now know it. For hundreds of years, Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples have been pressing for their Indigenous rights to be respected and their history to be understood. Heritage Ottawa makes efforts through our programs and partnerships to bring awareness to Algonquin history and heritage with events and programming. Our lecture series is made possible through the generosity of our sponsor, Andrix Holding, Inc., and Sandy Smallwood. Andrix has been a faithful sponsor of these free lectures. We're also grateful for an operations grant from the City of Ottawa and a heritage grant from the Province of Ontario. I'd also like to thank those of you who are members and those who have made donations to Heritage Ottawa and encourage this very concrete form of support. Giving Tuesday is coming on the 3rd of December and provides a wonderful opportunity to express your support for Heritage Ottawa by making a donation. Please visit our website at heritageottawa.org for further information about our Matching Funds initiative. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Maria Somjen has a Bachelor of Environmental Design, a Bachelor of Architecture, and a law degree from Dalhousie University. Before her retirement, she worked for the Government of Canada as a project director, mostly restoring federal heritage buildings in Ottawa. Her last major projects before retirement were the management of the renovation to the Canadian Museum of Nature, which took 10 years, and subsequently the planning for the renovation of the Supreme Court of Canada. Tonight, Maria will share with us some Canadian projects from the vast oeuvre of architect Moshe Safdie. Maria has agreed to take some questions at the end of her presentation. You can submit your question at any time via the Q&A function on your screen. Our moderator for the Q&A session will be Heritage Ottawa board member Paul Bennett. Thank you, Paul, for moderating this evening's questions. At the end of Maria's lecture, Paul will remind you to submit your questions. And with that, I'm now going to hand the evening over to Maria with thanks for joining us this evening.
There we are. I'm hoping everybody can see this all right. First of all, I'd like to thank Ian Ferguson for inviting me to come here to do this presentation, and for Catherine Spencer-Ross, Carolyn Quinn, and Jen Lane for just organizing this webinar, doing the description of it, and sending it out to all the members. This presentation was originally prepared for a Jewish audience as part of a series on Jewish architects, including people like Frank Gehry and Daniel Libeskind. Moshe Safdie was done in 2 presentations. The first presentation was his work in Canada, and his second, the work in Israel. This is the first presentation. To an organization like Heritage Ottawa, of primary importance are his buildings in Ottawa, especially his iconic National Gallery of Canada. This presentation may still be of interest, though, although it covers all his designs in all of Canada. Moshe Safdie has been practicing architecture for more than 60 years. His primary office is in Boston, but he also has satellite offices in Jerusalem, on and off in Toronto, Shanghai, and Singapore. His oeuvre encompasses more than 75 completed buildings, communities, and master plans on 3 continents, and an even greater number of projects and competition entries. It's impossible to discuss all his projects. The presentation will be chronological, starting with Safdie's first 15 years in Israel, then his move to Montreal, his attendance at McGill, his travel fellowship, and his final thesis, which led to his involvement in Expo 67. More than a decade after Habitat 67, Safdie was given two projects in Canada in succession: the Quebec Museum of Civilization in Quebec City, not to be confused with the Museum of History in Hull, and the all-important National Gallery of Canada. Subsequently, he also designed an addition to the Montreal Museum of Fine Art, Musée des Beaux-Arts, an addition to Ottawa City Hall, and as well Library Square, Vancouver. More recently, he was principal architect for Terminal 1 at the Lester B. Pearson Airport and also the Mondale condominiums in Toronto. Finally, I'd like to look at Orca, which is a project designed by Safdie for Toronto, but not built yet, and probably never, but of interest to see how his designs evolved. Moshe Safdie was born in 1938 in Haifa during the British Mandate of Palestine. His family was Sephardic of Syrian Jewish descent. His mother, born and raised in Manchester, England, came from a family of Jews from Aleppo, Syria. She held to a strong tradition that placed the family in Spain at the time of the expulsion and Inquisition at the end of the 15th century. They did not speak Ladino, but they preserved the Sephardic custom of lighting an extra candle each night of Hanukkah. His father's family may have originated in the town of Safed, located in the mountains of the Galilee in Israel, and they may have moved to Aleppo, hence the name Safdie from Safed. In any case, his father arrived in Haifa in 1935, and like many of his fellow Aleppians, he was involved in the textile trade. You can see in the slides there the Art Deco influence in the architecture of Haifa during Safdie's time. Spreading up the hills from downtown were Bauhaus-style buildings. Safdie was 9 years old when on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel and after the Arab-Israeli War. By age 11, Safdie and his friends had joined youth movements, the Scouts, Hashemor Hatzair, a socialist Zionist secular youth movement, and other groups. As Safdie explained it, the idea was that at the age of 18, they would join the army and after that become a kibbutz in the country. In the summer, he attended Kibbutz Niyot Mordechai, north of the Sea of Galilee, to get a first-hand taste of that life. In the early days of the kibbutzim, the accommodation was austere and children and adults were separated. Since it was a young kibbutz, it was poor and the work was hard. Safdie tended goats and kept bees. Safdie said he did not perform that well in high school because his social life in the youth groups and the kibbutz took all his energy. Safdie spent his childhood until he was 15 years old in Haifa. Jewish immigration, primarily from Europe during the early decades of the 20th century, had by 1945 transformed the city's overwhelmingly Arab Muslim population into a heterogeneous mixture of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. In Haifa, young Safdie encountered a model of multi-ethnic globalism. Downtown had an Arab bazaar and an arcaded street typical of colonial architecture. As in most warm climates, much of daily life was lived outside the confines of the home in semi-public patios and public plazas, streets, and beaches. From this evolved his later idea that architectural forms could support a progressive social agenda and should contain concentrations of high-density residential housing, as well as offering different kinds of semi-public and public spaces. The land on which Safdie was raised was then, and continues to be, one of the most highly politicized societies in the world. Most Jewish settlers to Palestine were like the young Safdie himself, ardent Zionists, who believed they were creating for Jews a haven from political persecution and social ostracism. Spirited debate and outright conflict about the legitimacy and the ideal form of their society was common, both among Jews and between Jews and non-Jews. Safdie still remembers his anger when his parents decided to leave Israel for Montreal, believing that their departure betrayed Zionism. Today, he holds citizenships in the United States, Israel, and Canada, and is married to an Israeli. I just thought you might be interested. My partner, Mike, and I took a trip to Israel in 2020. One of the purposes of that trip was to visit every Moshe Safdie building and his birthplace, Haifa. This is Haifa. We stood at the top of the hill in Haifa, looking down over the world-famous, gorgeous Baha'i terrace gardens with the Mediterranean in the distance. Thought you just might like to see what it looks like now. Life in Montreal. In 1953, the Israeli government restricted imports in response to an economic and currency crisis, which severely affected Safdie's father's textile business. Consequently, when Safdie was 15, his father moved the family to Montreal. Safdie did not want to leave Israel and his friends. He planned on returning after he finished high school, but at the same time, his interest in architecture grew, and by the time he finished high school, he knew he wanted to be an architect. His father objected because he wanted him to take over the business. The family had been wealthy in Israel, but now life was a struggle. So Safdie went to work at a hardware store, selling tools to earn his university fees. In the fall of 1955, he registered as an architectural student at McGill, and at the end of his studies, Safdie, who was top of his class, received a scholarship from Canada Mortgage and Housing to tour the US to look at housing. On that tour, Safdie discovered two different types of housing: high-rise apartment building, and which seemed not to work for families, and suburbia, which seemed profligate, although it offered amenities that people generally preferred when they had a choice. He felt that a new form of housing should be developed that would recreate in a high-density environment, incorporating the relationships and amenities of the single-family house and the village. For his final sixth-year thesis, Safdie developed a three-dimensional modular building system. It had all the ingredients that would eventually make up habitat. He made a model showing what a community of 5,000 people would be like. It was composed of repetitive three-dimensional modules capable of application to various sites. The modules could be stacked in many configurations to create a variety of housing types. The flexible arrangement allows for a complex in which no two dwellings are exactly alike, and each can be recognized from the exterior. Because the modules are stacked on top of one another, walls and ceilings are doubled up, providing sound attenuation and privacy not achievable in conventional city apartment high-rise construction. Modules are arranged in a staggered form, stepping back and allowing each roof to become an outdoor terrace for another dwelling. Pedestrian streets and vertical elevator and stair cores form the primary circulation system. When Safdie submitted his thesis, he received the highest mark and was awarded the gold medal. Safdie said he was a better student in Canada because social life was more restricted than in Israel with its youth groups. The medal came with a traveling scholarship. He and his wife, Nina, traveled for 2 months. Safdie had married Nina Nusinovich in 1959. She's a Polish-Israeli Holocaust survivor. They met in Montreal, and she worked at Bell Telephone and supported Safdie until he graduated from McGill. In 1961, while Safdie was doing his thesis, his daughter Tal was born. As an aside, Tal is now an architect in San Diego, and his son Oren, who was born during the erection of Habitat, is a playwright who's written several plays about architecture. After the trip, and after apprenticing for 1 year with Louis Kahn in Philadelphia, Safdie returned to Montreal to oversee the master plan for the 1967 World Exhibition. In 1964, he established his own firm to realize Habitat 67, an adaptation of his undergraduate thesis. He was all of 26 years old. Safdie's aspiration for Habitat was to achieve the benefits of the suburban single-family home, its visual and acoustic privacy, and its individual plot of land at the lower cost per unit and more efficient land use of urban housing. Habitat was conceived as an apartment building that functioned as a city within a city, with residential units as well as community and cultural facilities. It employed a completely new structural system of stacked prefabricated concrete boxes lifted into place by cranes. A special innovation was the prefabricated bathrooms of molded fiberglass and the pre-assembled kitchens by Frigidaire. Offering private entry like freestanding houses, Habitat's 158 units were accessed from plexiglass canopied pedestrian skywalks located on every fourth floor. The composition of step modules provided every dwelling with access to sun and air, as well as a private garden terrace. By providing every unit a garden, Habitat 67 captured some of the most desirable amenities of freestanding homes, while also providing opportunities for the economies and amenities of high-density urban living. Habitat was supposed to be a man and his environment pavilion. The original plan was for 1,200 units and a hotel and 2 schools and a shopping center, but it was scaled down because it was too expensive. A factory on the site prefabricated the box modules, each roughly 600 square feet in size. They were lifted and stacked by cranes and post-tensioned to create the stepped form. 365 construction modules connected to create 158 residences. These ranged in size from 600 square feet, one-bedroom dwellings to 1,800 square foot, 4-bedroom dwellings. In all, there are 15 different housing types. Step back in their modular basement, each residence has its own roof garden. Play areas for young children are provided throughout the whole building. 3 elevator cores direct vertical circulation throughout the complex. Elevators stop at every 4th floor to serve pedestrian streets. The streets are continuous throughout the project, and access to the dwellings is directly off them. The project incorporates both covered parking for tenants and additional visitor parking. The interior components were produced, assembled, and installed into each box unit in the factory, with single-unit bathrooms of gel-coated fiberglass. Kitchens, as I said, were manufactured by Frigidaire, and window frames made of Geon plastic. It was the first major prefabricated housing project ever constructed. Safdie and Nina moved into Habitat one day after the opening. In the 6 months of Expo, 7 million people flowed through the building. Safdie was asked to do tours for politicians, reporters, and dignitaries from all over the world, and he was also constantly getting involved with the administration of the building. Nina suggested that they cut the umbilical cord and move out, which they did. In 1986, a decade after Habitat's arrival, was greeted with critical acclaim, but skepticism about whether people would actually want to live there. The renters purchased the complex for $12 million. Excuse me. It had originally cost $21 million to build, and have since then made considerable improvements. However, Habitat, which was conceived as a utopian scheme for low-cost housing, is not only affordable to the upper middle class. I think Ada Louise Huxtable said it very well. I'll just read this quote from her. Habitat, Moshe Safdie's brainchild and beautiful obsession that was the showpiece of Montreal's Expo 67. What started there as a serious megastructure was completed in vastly reduced and compromised form as something less than the inexpensive General Motors type housing product intended. It was a handcrafted Cadillac, an enormously costly, non-standardized, custom-made model. While it offered a tentative demonstration of a handsome and rational design principle, it was also a sad case of production realities. After Habitat 67, Safdie started a different phase of his career. With the outbreak of the Six-Day War in the spring of 1967, Safdie, who was living in Montreal, sought to enlist in the Israeli military, but the conflict ended before he could leave Canada. Safdie went back to Israel in 1967 to give a paper at an international conference of architects and engineers. It was his first return since 1954. He did, however, finish Israeli's compulsory military training and opened an office. His timing was serendipitous. Victory had returned Jerusalem's old city to Israel, which created significant opportunities for architectural progress and projects. So that's the second presentation that I do of Safdie's is all of this stuff. So now we'll go back to Canada. In February of 2020, one of the condominiums at Habitat 67 was listed for sale. For little more than 1.3 million, you could be the proud owner of a 2-bedroom, 3-cube apartment. The building was named a historic monument by the city of Montreal in 2007, and the exterior of the complex, as well as the interior of the 4 cubes belonging to Safdie, was classified as a historic monument by Quebec in 2009. Just so you know, there are regular tours held, and it's especially interesting to see Moshe Safdie's unit, which is completely vacant, but still has all the elements of the 1967 construction. Most of the other units have been renovated and modernized. The tours are available in French and English, and you just Google Expo 67 or Habitat 67. Safdie was commissioned to design other habitats. In New York in 67, Puerto Rico 68, Israel in 69, Rochester 71, Tehran 76, and Baltimore 81. Only 2 were partially built. Baltimore's Cold Spring Newtown, photo on the left, a neighborhood wedged between a predominantly white neighborhood and a predominantly African-American neighborhood, where only 225 units out of the original planned 3,780 units were built. Also removed from that project were 100,000 square feet of retail, 250,000 square feet of office space, plus conference centers and schools. In the Puerto Rico project, the government pulled the funding for the project after only 30 of the 800 planned 430 square foot units were built. Safdie said the 70s were for him a series of disappointment, and the photo on the right is actually part of the Puerto Rico project. What I thought was interesting, and unfortunately I couldn't get permission quickly enough to include in this slideshow. Closer to home in 1974, the Northwest Territories government commissioned Safdie to build 81 housing units in Frobisher Bay for the Inuit community. Safdie wanted to build igloo-shaped houses, but the federal government preferred the bungalow model. 1 year later, the government designed and built 30 houses that cost $42,000 more per house than Safdie's design. If anyone is interested in that project, it's online at McGill, and it's really worth looking at. While continuing to oversee projects, Safdie served as director of urban design from 78 to 84, and later professor of architecture and urban design from 84 to 89 at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. It's Quebec Museum of Civilization in Quebec City, which was the first project in Canada after Habitat 67. It was 13 years later when he won the competition for that museum. The museum occupies a large city block along the St. Lawrence River in the historic district of Quebec City. Entrances from both the riverside and the city side of the building form a concourse, which acts as the museum's main foyer and connects the upper and lower city. The central meeting place incorporates an original court formed by the stone wall of the restored Maison d'Estaing and is flanked by upper and lower galleries connected by a bridge. The original river edge, uncovered during construction, is restored within the heart of the building, inscribing a memory of the city's past. The concourse roof forms a grand public stairway leading to a rooftop park. A spire, adjacent to the river entrance and accessible from the roof garden, serves as a lookout. Right in the heart of Old Quebec, the museum is distinctly modern while blending in with its historic setting. The modern design incorporates pre-existing buildings with contemporary architecture, and during the renovation, the museum transitioned from a conservation center to a museum as a social center. The galleries are organized by a tartan grid, as you can see in the left bottom, with narrow modules containing the mechanical services and wider module for the exhibition spaces. Dormers and skylights in the roof provide natural light to the gallery spaces, and local gray limestone clad the exterior of the walls. Light entering the museum is diffused through polycarbonate panels framed with aluminum tubes. The building won a number of awards for its architecture: Prix d'Excellence en Architecture, Ordre des Architectures du Québec, 1988, the Governor General's Medal for Architecture, RAIC, that's Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, in 1982. And while he was completing this building in 1981, Safdie and his wife divorced, and Safdie married Michelle Ronan, a Jerusalem-born photographer. They have two daughters, Carmel and Yasmin. Carmel is now an artist and Yasmin a social worker. Now to the iconic National Gallery of Canada. In 1982, the Government of Canada decided to build two museums on either side of the Ottawa River: a Museum of Civilization in Quebec and a National Gallery in Ontario. 12 architects were invited to apply, and each one had to choose which museum it would like to design. Moshe Safdie was one of the invited architects, and he chose the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Quebec. He felt that he might have more of a chance since he'd just designed a Museum of Civilization for Quebec City, and he lived in Quebec. 3 days before the final announcement, he was called and told that Douglas Cardinal would be given the Museum of Civilization, and asked whether he could prepare sketches for the gallery in the 3 days that were left. Safdie told them it was impossible to do that, and that they would have to decide on the material he had submitted for the Museum of Civilization. 3 days later, he was told he'd been awarded the gallery and he could start the building from scratch. This slide shows on the left the dramatic glass ceiling in the Great Hall with its kaleidoscope pattern and sails for sun blocking. On the right is the Curnow family atrium, which features a glass-bottomed pool, soaring skylights, and displays bronze sculptures. Safdie won the competition for Canada's first purpose-built National Gallery of Art, vying against such leading Canadian architects as Arthur Erickson and Barton Myers. Completed in 1988, the National Gallery was a pivotal project in Safdie's career. Representing the triumph of an outcast, considered such because more than a decade had elapsed between Habitat and his next Canadian commission. The museum is situated on a prominent rocky outcropping overlooking the Ottawa River opposite Canada's Parliament. The gallery houses 133,000 square feet of galleries, as well as facilities for educational programs, conservation, art storage, and administration. In its design, the building featured some of Safdie's first great communal spaces: a monumental stairway, a glazed colonnade overlooking the museum's commanding site, and an elaborately skylit great hall juxtaposed with the intimate spaces for viewing arts. An ingenious system of chimney-like wells with skylights, bringing daylight into ground floor gallery demonstrates Safdie's mastery of natural light. The gallery is also situated within Ottawa's historical context. The conical shape of the museum's Great Hall, for example, evokes the buttressed roof of the nearby Library of Parliament. I'm sure you know all of that. From the Great Hall, a promenade forms a second axis leading to a rotunda. All galleries are entered from either the Great Hall or the rotunda. Beyond the rotunda, a continuation of the promenade axis leads to separate curatorial wing, connected to the main building by bridges at each principal level. Excuse me just a second. I've had COVID for 3 weeks, so I apologize. The large areas of collections and exhibition spaces are organized into legible groups of galleries. The exhibition spaces are complemented by garden atria. On the left is the glass-covered landscaped garden court, which contains massive Canadian Shield limestone rocks that create an undulating topography. A gravel path suggesting a riverbed winds its way through a bed of greenery composed of ferns and orchids. On the right is the secondary rotunda, with a sculpture entitled Symphony, which is by Jamaican-Canadian artist Tao Lewis. The piece is fabricated from repurposed clothing, fabrics, and seashells. Probably you all have seen and know this, but this is the relocated Rideau Street Chapel, which was originally part of Our Lady of the Sacred Hearts, a girls' boarding school in Ottawa run by the Sisters of Charity. In 1972, this treasure of our Canadian heritage was saved from destruction and eventually reconstructed inside the National Gallery. It is said that it is one of only 2 architectural exhibits in North America and is currently the setting for Janet Cardiff's 40-part motet. Although I quibble a little with this because I think the Nova Scotia room at the gallery is also an architectural exhibit. Montreal Museum of Fine Art, Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal. In 1987, Moshe Safdie was engaged to design a major expansion to the Montreal Museum of Fine Art, the Jean-Noël Desmarais Pavilion. Originally, he intended to tear down the new Sherbrooke, built in 1905, to enable the construction of an impressive edifice directly opposite the museum's original 1912 art gallery. But that plan met with vigorous opposition. The contention was that an imposing building would completely overwhelm the urban fabric around it. It seemed natural, even essential to all the members of the museum's board, that the new pavilion be connected to the older building by an underground passage beneath Sherbrooke Street. Safdie, taking his inspiration from the old building, retained the idea of a massive portico for the entrance to the museum, which would lead into a glass-roofed lobby. The new edifice was modern, airy, and inviting, while at the same time reflecting its surroundings and the neighborhood buildings in a respectful way. This slide shows Safdie's model of the building. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts new building was inaugurated on November 21st, 1991, and it was unanimously hailed by the critics. Nonetheless, there were some caveats expressed in respect to the ramped staircase leading from the entrance hall, and I think the galleries had the same criticism about the ramp in the National Gallery. Some found its incline to be too shallow, its steps too deep, and its risers too low, making it awkward to navigate. But according to Safdie, that was intentional. So visitors will be aware they have entered a place where they won't walk at the same pace as on the street. It is considered that the Jean-Noël Desmarais Pavilion greatly contributed to changing the museum's image, making it more accessible and inviting. The transparent facade is just as monumental as the Maxwell Brothers neoclassical portico across the street, but much more welcoming. I thought this massive counter that I show here in this slide is simply stunning, as it appears to defy gravity by floating on its points. generating an interesting perspective. The marble that envelops it has veins crisscrossing the various surfaces, which give the impression of a folded sheet. The sun shield above it is made of clear anodized aluminum slats, blocking out the heat and sun while creating interesting contrasts of shadow and light throughout the day. As an interesting aside, not relevant to architecture, some of you may remember the robbery at the museum of $12.5 million of art in 1972. With the insurance money, the museum bought a Peter Paul Rubens. After examination, the painting turned out to have been painted 40 years after Rubens died and is now attributed to one of his students. It is no longer on display. I'm just going to take a sip of water, if you don't mind. Ottawa City Hall. I've actually never gone and looked at this because I think it's probably hard to get to, but I could probably make that arrangement. I found it quite interesting. I'd love to see it in person. I've only sort of driven around it, Federation Boulevard. Ottawa City Hall is located on Green Island in the Rideau River, perpendicular to Confederation Boulevard, which links Parliament Hill and the residence of the Governor General. The building served as Ottawa City Hall from 1958 to 2001. The original new international style building, which you'll see better in the next picture, was called the John G. Diefenbaker Building, and it was designed by John Bland of Rotherham and Trudeau. It opened in 1958. The structure was noted for being the first building in Ottawa to be fully air-conditioned. It's considered one of the most important international style buildings in Canada, winning the Massey Medal for Design in 1958. It was designated a classified federal heritage building in 2001, and there's a wonderful Fibro description if anybody's interested. Again, that's available online. So you can see the modernist slab there towards the top of the picture. And as a complement to this building, Moshe Safdie designed a series of indoor and outdoor spaces seeking to create a community of public functions on the grassy island site in the Rideau River. Inscribed stainless steel and glass roofs rise from a base of solid masonry walls. Precast columns and beams frame the public thoroughfares, and on the south facing colonnade, there are stainless steel brise soleil. The complex contains two new wings at a 90-degree angle to the existing City Hall, extending east on Green Island and linking a series of indoor and outdoor spaces to create a new public realm. Conflict soon broke out between Safdie and the city. Safdie demanded a higher fee and delayed the project for several months before the city acquiesced to his demand. Further disagreement broke out over a pair of 18-story observation towers. City Council voted to cut the towers to save the $1 million they cost. This infuriated Safdie, who felt the towers were essential to the design. The panel that picked the design had singled out the tower as one of the highlights of the design. Eventually, the city compromised, and a bare scaffold was erected instead. You can see the bare scaffold there on the left. The new building caused considerable controversy in the city, with some liking the design, but others seeing the $72 million structure as a waste of money. The building was much larger than the city needed, and for several years, large sections were vacant. In 1999, the offices were rented out to Global Affairs Canada, and the building was finally bought by the federal government in 2003 and is occupied by GAC. I love this project. Library Square, Vancouver. The design for Library Square includes the library, a federal office tower, and integrated retail and service facilities. The complex occupies an entire city block in the eastward expansion of Vancouver's downtown area. In 1992, the winning submission of Moshe Safdie was announced by Vancouver City Council. It was by far the most radical design in comparison to other buildings in the city, and yet it was the public favorite. The heart of the Vancouver Library is a spiraling grand urban room that draws the public into the library. It's both a quiet place for study and contemplation and a vital community meeting place. The book stacks and services are organized within a 9-story rectilinear central volume wrapped by a multi-story colonnade containing reading and study areas, as well as retail and community-facing programs. The library is topped by a sustainable roof designed by the renowned landscape architect, for those of you who went on a tour with her, I think last month, Cornelia Hahn Oberlander. And there's a grand reading room. The building's walls are clad in sandstone-colored precast concrete and granite quarried in Horsefly, BC. As you can tell from this photo, overall structure is a rectangle on the left with an ellipse on the right. In 2017, Moshe Safdie was retained to do a 2-floor expansion for meeting rooms, a glass-enclosed reading room, a small theater, an exhibition space, and outdoor terraces, and a rooftop garden designed by Cornelia Hahn Oberlander. The original green roof remains. Subsequently, solar panels have been installed as an educational feature. There's been some criticism of Library Square. Some architectural critics attack it by likening it to Caesar's Palace. Others felt that the public response was solicited, but then disregarded. Next project is Pearson International Airport. In order to accommodate rapid growth in traffic and the need to replace a disconnected collection of dated buildings, the Greater Toronto Airports Authority commissioned the joint venture of Safdie Architects, SOM, and Adamson's Associates to rethink the entire complex. Designed for an eventual flow of 40 million people per year, the 15-year phased development strategy replaced all existing terminals with a new Terminal 1, while maintaining full airport operations throughout the construction. Beyond the terminal, the redevelopment also included new runways, major modified cargo facilities, aircraft maintenance facilities, and improved road access. Safdie was able to enhance the experience of arriving passengers and to minimize the level changes, while at the same time negotiating the complex requirement of segregating arriving and departing passengers. In the right photo, there's a view of Richard Serra's installation. This sculpture is one of the monumental public art installations specifically commissioned for the airport to communicate the essence of flight. The intention of the design team was to harvest the light and showcase its unique qualities in all seasons. In the departure hall, a bank of windows and long glass slits in the arched ceiling capture the light. The combination of daylight and clear spatial order help with orientation and wayfinding. This is a photo of the Monde residential development. On the left is the rooftop infinity pool, and the right is one of the green walls within the complex. The units vary in size from 531 square feet to 1,655 square feet, and from $500,000 to $1.6 million. Although that may be a couple of years old, so it may be even more now. The Monde development proposal is located in the East Bayfront precinct of Toronto. The 44-story residential tower is stepped in profile, descending towards the south to create penthouse-like units with gardens open to the sky. The surface of the facades is modulated to create 2 planes. The outer plane is stepped towards the south, creating balconies. The inner plane is glazed, shaded by the outer plane, affording dramatic views and transparency. The descending terraces create a strong connection in the skyline to Lake Ontario. The terraces allow planting to be present at every level of the building. The project offers a delicate balance between solid and void, alternating layers of generous glazing with limestone-colored precast concrete frames. Safdie used the mathematical principle of fractals to maximize the surface area of the buildings, creating many terraces and allowing as much sunlight as possible to penetrate inside. For this, he draws inspiration from trees, themselves master of light dispersion. The tree's all about finding a pattern of the leaf and tree structure to maximize the absorption of light, he said. When you build tall buildings, it's all about the pattern of light. Like a tree canopy, a forest of high-rises must be porous enough to allow light to filter to the street level and into individual units, something that requires both architectural ingenuity and careful urban planning. This is the final project. It's a future project that Moshe Safdie designed for Toronto, and it's quite large in its scale, as you can see here. It's a new mixed-use development proposed by Moshe Safdie, located in downtown Toronto. It has residential, office, hotel, retail, and transit. And they're all designed around a new 11-acre park. Orca will deck across the 100-meter wide by 800-meter long active rail corridor, which leads to Union Station. The corridor splits the city and is a barrier to the waterfront from King Street West. By tucking vehicular access and parking within the decking structure, 65% of the site area is left as publicly accessible open space, exclusively for pedestrians and bicyclists. Unlike Ford, who wants to get rid of bicycle lanes, but never mind that. The project includes 8 residential towers with approximately 3,000 units of housing, 900,000 square feet of commercial office tower, and 450,000 square feet of retail space opening directly onto the park. The interconnected towers are positioned to preserve sunlight on the park and encourage access to and from the surrounding neighborhoods. The project integrates retail and landscape by tucking shopping under the park. This turns the traditional shopping mall model inside out by directly connecting shops, restaurants, and cafes with the park's recreational experiences on multiple levels. The Galleria opens up in good weather to encourage indoor-outdoor use and year-round vibrancy. The slender residential towers are placed to preserve view corridors and are articulated with stepping balconies and connected with elevated bridges containing amenities for residents. The bridges between the towers form dramatic urban windows which frame the city views. You can see it here. Toronto's Orca demonstrates the potential of a vibrant and active park-oriented urban community. The private development would provide amenities and ensure year-round activity in the park. It was envisioned that private and public cooperation would ensure the financing, quality, and maintenance of the park into the future. I think some kind of P3 was thought to be the model for this kind of large-scale development. This is Moshe Safdie with Adrienne Clarkson when she was Governor General of Canada. It's quite interesting because in 1967, she had interviewed him for her CBC Cultural Affairs show entitled Habitat 67, Moshe Safdie's Masterpiece. And then in 1988, in a segment for her summer festival show called Our New National Gallery, she interviewed him again. Here she is giving him the Companion of the Order of Canada. Safdie's been the recipient of numerous awards, honorary degrees, and civil honors, including, as I said, the Companion of the Order of Canada, the gold medal from both the RAIC and the AIA, the National Design Award for Lifetime Achievement by the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian, and recently the Great Wolf Prize in Architecture, awarded for a career motivated by the social concerns of architecture and formal experimentation. I just thought this was interesting. I wanted to show it because I just thought it might be interesting for you. Excellence in architecture is represented in these stamps, which were issued in 2007 to commemorate the centenary of the RAIC. The stamps feature the work of world-renowned architects Arthur Erickson, University of Lethbridge, Douglas Cardinal, St. Mary's Church in Red Deer, Alberta, Raymond Moriyama, the Ontario Science Centre, and Moshe Safdie, the National Gallery. Elements of the original sketches are displayed on the left. Out of those architects, Moshe and Cardinal and Safdie are still alive. Arthur Erickson died age 85 in 2009. Douglas Cardinal actually turned 90 this year, and I went to his birthday party, which was wonderful. Raymond Moriyama died at age 93 just last year, and Moshe Safdie's 86. I think there seems to be some kind of longevity in practicing architecture. I wish. Just one final comment. This is the end. It must be remembered that architecture is a discipline that operates in a complex public arena, and an architect's initial concept must be negotiated with clients, engineers, contractors, financial partners, special interest groups, and the general public. I actually find it quite amazing that anything innovative actually gets built at all. I've not gone into all the details about the politics surrounding the competitions for each building and the discussions related to preservation politics, economics, culture, and aesthetics, which converge in often heated debates by the public and professionals. All these stories about Moshe Safdie are available in books and articles, and at McGill University, which is a repository since 1990, of more than 100,000 drawings, models, and personal papers that constitute Moshe Safdie Archive.
Thank you, Maria, for your insightful, fascinating, and well-illustrated presentation. I'm sure that this evening's participants particularly appreciated your emphasis upon Safdie's Canadian buildings, with which we will be most familiar. And thank you also, Maria, for agreeing to take a few questions. Some of you have already submitted these for Maria through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and I invite others to do so now. I will moderate the questions and comments for repetition and length so that Maria can answer them most efficiently. I would be remiss at this point, however, if I didn't mention the role of Heritage Ottawa in actually working to have the Rideau Street Chapel reinstated in the National Gallery. That's one of our proudest accomplishments. One of the questions we have relates to someone who visited Habitat 67 in 67, and he thought it would serve as a model for multiple similar space-efficient developments. Now, you've given a couple of suggestions, particularly at the end, as to why that didn't really take off. And I was wondering if you go into a little bit more detail. Is it politics? Is it the cost of production? Are there design flaws? The role of developers? Why do you think the efficiency never took root that he had in mind?
Well, it was quite experimental in its day. And every one of those boxes had to be structurally designed and then built and then lifted into place. It was an extremely complex operation, actually. It sounds easy, building a bunch of cubes and piling them. But since they're all different formations and the post-tensioning, and it just became very expensive. It's like Ada Louise Huxtable said, it was too difficult to fabricate and it became too expensive. And so they stopped it after so many units.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Another relates to the influence of Louis Kahn. You mentioned that Safdie studied or worked with him briefly. How did Kahn influence what Safdie ended up doing?
I don't know. That I don't know. He was there for such a short time that and why did he only stay a year? I guess is the question as well. Because if he thought he was learning something that he wanted to learn, I think he might have stayed, but who knows? I don't know. I haven't read anything. Someone else may know, but I don't know and I don't know Louis Kahn's architecture that well either, I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Another question relates to the fact that Safdie has only occasionally an office in Canada and hasn't done that many other projects in Canada in the last few years. Does that relate to the state of Canadian architecture, the state of the economy, his interests are elsewhere? Any thoughts on that?
He's his projects, as you could see in the last project, the proposal, they're large, they're expensive, they require a lot of parties to get together and agree on it. I thought it was fabulous because of the way it goes over all the railway tracks that divide, the lake from Toronto. But I just don't, it's an extremely expensive project, I expect. And maybe Canadians don't have that kind of income. I mean, he's done that kind of project in Singapore, right? And but the wealth in Singapore is, I think, quite a bit different from the wealth in Canada. So
Yeah.
I just think maybe cost, and maybe I don't know why he hasn't been invited more often to design things. I think they may be out of scale for Canada, but I think they would be so fabulous.
One attendee asks, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but given the long-standing relationship that Safdie had with Cornelia Oberlander and the mutual respect therein, how might he feel about the minimal maintenance upkeep, sadly apparent, of her landscape architecture treatments, for example, the Tiger Garden at the National Gallery?
Yeah, I know that was supposed to look like an Arctic garden with all the trees bending against the wind, if I remember correctly. I didn't go on the tour, but I don't know. Safdie must see, I mean, architects see things happening to their buildings everywhere. And unless they're like Douglas Cardinal, who actually got up on his and complained about something that somebody did to his buildings and had it removed, I think they just kind of shrug their shoulders and move on because they can't, there's not much they can do about it. And is it worth making a fuss about? I think if we did something to the Great Hall or, the ramp or the some other parts of the building, he might come back and complain. But I think and the whole behind the museum, everything is changing now. With the walkway across to Confederation Park and all of that stuff. I don't know how I expect he doesn't come back and look. I can't get him to come back and talk to my group, so.
When one looks at the early work, let's say Habitat 67, to the Toronto proposal or what he did in Singapore, apart from cost and scale, would you notice any consistencies or any evolution in his work?
Well, he seems, what I like about his high rises are very high, and he's got that one in Singapore, which is called the Marina Bay Sands. That's what it's called. And it's got the infinity pool right on top with 3 towers coming down. But you can really see through, even though it's high and they're high rises, you can really see through between the buildings. And when you're walking around there, which I have done, you don't feel overwhelmed by the buildings. And there's usually lots of green space and beautiful landscaping, especially in Singapore because of the weather, beautiful flowers and stuff. And that seems to be kind of his design style, but I haven't looked at some of the stuff he's done for Taiwan or in China or other places. The only thing I've seen is the Singapore buildings. And even not the latest one, he did some kind of art science museum recently, which I haven't seen yet. I've seen pictures of it. But and it's wonderful. It's full of wings. It's almost like the Sydney Opera House, actually, this art science museum in some ways. So he does do smaller scale stuff that are quite amazing. But I think his larger scale stuff tends to be similar.
Okay. And I certainly encourage participants tonight to look at the website of Safdie, of his architecture firm, because there you have visual representations of all his projects, and they're really quite striking, the variety and the excellence of them.
Yeah, they're and good descriptions. For the earlier projects, you have to go to McGill. The ones that he has on his website, he doesn't have the really early projects on his website because they were done, I don't know, 60 years ago. And so he has, but they're beautiful pictures. You could see when you go there, you'll see that I stole some.
Okay. Does the average person or member of Heritage Ottawa, are they able to get into McGill to see his papers, or
Yes.
do you require a special permit?
No, no. You just do a little digging. It's there, and a lot of it's online. Not everything, of course, but some quite interesting stuff. For instance, the little igloo houses that he designed for Frobisher Bay, which is now Iqaluit, are really, really quite interesting. You can certainly see those. I tried to pluck them off the site, but I couldn't get them. Then I wrote to Moshe Safdie for permission, and I haven't heard from him.
Okay. Okay, well, that's Canada Post. So we're going to wrap things up now. So if you have additional questions, please email them to Heritage Ottawa and at info@heritageottawa.org, and we'll share them with our speaker. I would like to thank Maria once again for her excellent presentation. I'm sure that members of tonight's audience will see the National Gallery and other examples of Safdie's work in a new light. I'd like to remind you that Heritage Ottawa's next lecture will take place on the 18th of December in person in the sacred space in the Beechwood National Memorial Center at Beechwood Cemetery. Our lecturer is Dominion Carolyneur, Dr. Andrea McCready. A reception will follow the lecture. Please visit our website to register. Finally, as mentioned at the beginning of tonight's session, Heritage Ottawa lectures are provided free of charge. We encourage you to join Heritage Ottawa if you're not yet a member, and to donate to the organization to help continue efforts to share heritage stories. Further information is available on our website. And with that, thank you for joining us, and good night.